This session is from ASF's 2024 conference at RMIT Melbourne with Kevin Donnelly, Andy Mullins, Tim Berryman, Steve Chavura and Jason Strecker.
Stephen Chavura is a senior lecturer in history at Campion College, Sydney. He is author and co-author of 3 books and regularly contributes to the public debate in print and podcasts. Dr. Chavura has been a vocal defender of religious freedom and freedom of speech over the past 5 years. He was also a vocal opponent of the draconian vaccine mandates during the COVID panic and lamented seeing Australia descend to a manufactured hysteria not seen since World War. Just on a personal note, some personal research that I did on Stephen as well, I found out that he's actually been labelled the handsomest man to be on the Bolt Report, according to social media. But don't let his masculine physique fool you, because he's got a heart for kids, for young men and young women growing up. So much so that my wife and I and our family have got to see him in action in a couple of public forums, but we actually couldn't get close to him. He was like the rock star of academics. He's been surrounded by young people all the time, which I thought was actually pretty cool. In fact, so much so that ARC conference, I got a text from someone there saying the highlight of the ARC conference was the ability to spend some time with Stephen. Take that, Jordan Peterson. Stephen, over to you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I always, when I hear things like this, I always think, where was all this popularity back then? This is the thing. Okay, you can, we're okay here? Okay, look, this is a very brief talk, and it's called Against Critical Thinking. So maybe I'll get some pushback here. So the universal mantra of universities these days, when sort of asked, what do you come here to do at university? What are you going to teach students? The answer is always the same. We're going to teach you how to think critically. We're not going to teach you what to think. We're going to teach you how to think. That's certainly what I heard, and I think it's more or less what we've been hearing for probably 30, 40 years at least. I guess I'm calling for something of a paradigm shift, particularly among those who are starting new institutions. And I guess if there's an upshot to my talk, it's something like, if you're going to start new institutions because you're unhappy with the old institutions, don't think twice before you start a trick as well. There might actually be a better way to conceptualize what we're doing for our students. Now, how can we critique the world if we know little to nothing about the world? In other words, critical thinking, whatever that is, can really only take place off the back of a lot of constructive and key truthful thinking. You have to know stuff in order to be able to think critically. No institution just teaches students to think critically. No institution just teaches students how to think. They all teach students what to think. I mean, it'd be a pretty strange ancient history lesson that I would give to my students if I didn't teach them the actual events about the Greco-Persian Wars. And I just sort of tried to teach them how to think about it. When you think about that, that doesn't even make a whole lot of sense. And I would actually say that the idea we don't teach people what to think, we teach people how to think. I think when you really interrogate it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It sounds good, but in actual thing, I think all education certainly involves teaching a lot of what to think. I'll sort of pick up on this a little bit later. And there's nothing wrong with teaching people what to think. Critical thinking and teaching, when universities say that we teach to think critically and not what to think and how to think, I think that's one of the biggest cons that the universities pull over people. And I propose a shift in our language away from thinking critically as sort of the raison d'etre of education and universities to thinking virtually. And this is one of those sort of nice providential moments where what I'm saying ties in very nicely with Andy's talk just then. And we didn't collude at all with one another. And the thing is, in universities, when they talk about critical thinking, they're really talking about critical. Two very different things, the kind of cultural Marxism that, that Kevin has written so much about over the years. So I propose that shift from thinking critically to thinking virtuously. Now, what does it mean to think virtuously? Well, really just sort of off the top of my head, these are just a few things I would say. One intellectual virtue is humility. You know, you don't know everything. In fact, there is a ton of stuff you don't know. And there's always going to be people much smarter than you. So the number one intellectual virtue for anyone is humility. We stand on the shoulders of... we want another aspect of thinking virtuously is to think constructively, to be able to say things that are positive, and I don't mean positive in the feel-good sense of way, but to actually describe how the world really is, to just sort of criticizing everything and trying to unpack all the different ways in which there are all sorts of different modes of oppression going on. So to actually be able to think constructively. Someone once asked a very good question. It was, how many university graduates in Australia 10 or 20 years after graduation, with all that they learned, all that they read, would be competent to say, write a constitution for a country? And the answer would be a sort of a minuscule amount. And if you want a humbling experience, check out the Federation debates of the 1890s. It's incredible that the minds who were writing the Constitution to create this country. Thinking consistently, and finally, thinking truly. Thinking truly. And if you'd ask me, you know, what the point of virtuous thinking is, it is to love and encounter the truth. Now, someone might say now, well, we can still use the expression critical thinking as sort of the reason for why we do what we do at universities, and we'll just do what you've sort of said, Chavura. I guess what I'm going to say now is the term itself is very unhelpful. By the way, I'm not saying that we don't actually learn critical thinking, and I'll come to that in a second, but the term is misleading and incomplete because you're not just doing critical thinking at university, you're not just learning how to think, you are being taught certain things about what to think, and again, I said there's nothing wrong with that as long as what you're being taught is good and true. Also, when you have a bunch of 18-year-olds in a classroom who know next to nothing, and you say, right, I'm going to teach you to think critically, I think it actually generates more hubris than it does humility. I mean, we're really going to give these youngsters Plato and say, right, stand up and tell me what's wrong with him. I mean, what a horribly hubristic thing to do, and also what a burden to place on the shoulders of young people to have to stand in judgment over the great thinkers of the ages. And I think, again, the expression thinking critically as sort of the raison d'etre of education, it excessive skepticism and even relativism, where the goal of finding the truth can actually be hindered. When someone starts to think, oh, this seems really true, they sort of pull back and think, oh, no. If I say something's true, I'm being a dogmatic and I'm not thinking critically anymore. So it can actually hinder some very, very important things should be obtaining. So in that sense, I think actual defining the end of universities as thinking critically can be very counterproductive. So I would sort of not use that. The goal of truth or virtuous thinking, if pursued, will create genuinely critical thinkers. The goal of critical thinking is not to create or to generate virtuous truth-seeking thinkers. And if experience is anything to go by, it's also unlikely to generate many critical thinkers either. New institutions, this is my last word to new institutions. My suggestion, don't thinking critically mantra of the old institutions. My suggestion is to say what we do here is teach people to think virtuously or to think truly. If you don't like that, then feel free to find a better one, but just think twice before you just adopt all the rhetoric of the old institution. Such a bad job over the last 20, 30 years. Thank you.
For further information on ASF, go to www.scienceandfreedom.org.